Here is why all minimum wage law is evil. Over the last few years, the UK government has raised the minimum wage by £4 an hour. The topic has become so clouded by emotional and political bias, people are supporting a policy they otherwise would not. Minimum wage legislation represents economical illiteracy and a gross ethical oversight. While seemingly egalitarian, it inadvertently disadvantages the lowest bracket of workers. Minimum wage will not only lead to the dispossession of the impoverished, but it is also an entirely racist and sexist policy. Everybody wants to solve poverty, the question is over the means to get there. In this video, I will teach you both the economical and ethical arguments against price floor legislation, as well as the dangers of government intervention. First, we must recognise what a wage is. A wage is a price, the price of paying a labourer for some amount of their time. Imagine if I told you the method to solve poverty is to raise the price of all branded products. Likely you would think that I am evil or insane, so why would raising the cost of labour produce a separate effect? Imagine you visited the shops. First you see a Cadbury chocolate bar. The government has mandated that it must cost £10. You'll be outraged at such a price, and instead you will decide to buy no chocolate bar at all, or look for a cheaper, unbranded alternative. Let's look at wages and see if they live up to this analogy. Wages is a cost for a business to employ an individual. It is the price of a person's labour. In essence, it is the exact same as the Cadbury chocolate bar, and so they follow the same logic. When wages are artificially increased, it forces the business to look for alternatives or forego hiring at all. The effects of this policy are the most damaging on the people it supposedly protects. The defence of minimum wage is typically that it prevents exploitation. However, this could not possibly be the case. It implies that without the government, businesses would constantly drive wages down. So then why do any jobs above the current minimum wage exist? If businesses can constantly make wage cuts, then should every job not just be the very minimum £12 an hour? Why would any business pay its workers more given that it loses them money? Because every employer is in competition with other employers in the market. If they drove their wages down, other competing firms would take the best workers in an industry by providing better deals. So the price floor is actually set by the least amount an individual will accept for their work. If it were true that the minimum wage could actually generate wealth, then why increase it in increments? What stops us just from making it £100 or even £1,000? The minimum wage being carefully managed is an admission of guilt. The entire sectors of the economy could be wiped out by it, that it would cause mass unemployment. But why does the minimum wage trend towards unemployment? First, we have to understand the difference between price floors and price ceilings. As we have already seen, a price floor is the minimum amount a worker will accept. The price ceiling, however, is determined by how much the worker produces. Imagine John working in a t-shirt factory. He produces one t-shirt every hour, which the business can sell for £10. That means the absolute maximum a business can pay John is £10 per hour. A penny more and they will be trending towards bankruptcy. If we take the minimum wage at £12 an hour, then the business would be making minus £2 an hour on John. If you can recall our Cadbury situation, we have the same problem. We have an idea of how much the chocolate is worth to us, and so when the cost is too much, we look for a cheaper alternative or decide not to buy it. In economics, abstinence comes in the form of unemployment, by deciding that it is not worth it to continue hiring. So if an entire industry operates at a productivity rate under the minimum wage, then it could not possibly survive. In this case, the employee takes the brunt of the damage. Whilst businesses still have the option to downscale or increase automation, the worker is left with no options. The situation gets even worse when you consider which employees it is that are most affected. Minimum wage jobs are predominantly occupied by younger unskilled labourers. The minimum wage acts as a barrier for unskilled workers, making it significantly harder for them to find unemployment. It's the equivalent of kicking off the bottom rung of a ladder and then boasting that the new lowest rung is slightly higher. Another secondary effect of this is that it is harder for young people to gain the experience necessary to move on to higher paying jobs. As the minimum wage increases, it becomes harder for these groups of people to improve their financial standing. Given that wages are now more expensive, a business must be more selective with its hiring practices. Before, they may have been willing to take risks on young people, unskilled workers, and people with criminal backgrounds. However, now, with tighter profit margins, there is more incentive to selectively hire. Young and unskilled workers will be looked at with more scrutiny. It becomes even harder for them to find employment. This has a further two devastating corollary effect. Young people that may have gone on to be skilled workers or business owners are now not getting the experience or training needed. They are fulfilling less valuable ends, cutting the number of potential engineers, carpenters, or mechanics. Not only does this rob the individual of pride and fulfillment that comes from working at their highest capacity, it also robs all future generations of the things they may have created. In effect, it stagnates both present and future workers. The fewer people that are creating businesses, the lower chance there is of new jobs being created. The minimum wage has such a snowball effect by making sure those who are poor will stay poor. This problem further disadvantages ethnic minorities and women. Given the increased employer scrutiny, bias and racial profiling become disproportionately problematic. Over long periods of time, entire sections of the population can be labelled as unproductive. Historically, this misrepresentation leads to stricter immigration laws and other heinous legislative policies. Sexism and racism in the job market is undeniable. However, these government interventions only make the problem worse. Rather than mitigate inequality, it actually removes the penalties a discriminatory employer would face. In a competitive free market, a sexist employer would see lower profits. Rather than selecting his workforce based on productivity, he would have chosen an arbitrary metric. As such, he would see his business suffer. Given this bias in hiring, a person may be willing to take less money or work a harder job in order to secure a position. However, the minimum wage takes away the person's bargaining power and ensures that the discriminatory employer will pick the most obvious candidate. So we can see not only does it force good businessmen to be more selective in hiring, forcing out otherwise good workers, but it also enables bad businessmen to continue in their biased ways. The minimum wage also disadvantages those with some level of skill. As wage costs have gone up at the lower end, so too at the higher end. Take for example a doctor. Once the minimum wage has increased, he would be comparatively poorer than he was before. The doctor would have to have his wage increased to reflect the new market state. This increase in wages will again cause selective hiring practices, forcing many doctors to move down into jobs that do not fully utilise their skills. An entire shift in the market happens where those with skill have to move on to less skilled jobs in order to meet the new demand. Workers with skill and education will pick up jobs that the lowest bracket were priced out of. Take an engineer. Originally, he may have had someone to clean his workstation. This would free up his time to be spent on the most productive and valuable ends. Instead now, due to the minimum wage increase, it is not practical to spend the money on a cleaner. So he must now dedicate a portion of his time to something that does not utilise his skills. In this case, both the job and a more productive arrangement have been ruined. Free markets will always trend towards optimal efficiency as prices reflect the value of things. Any intervention will obscure the true price of things, turning the economy away from its optimal state. The more intervention, the further it is from optimal. The end result is that man loses his ability to express his potential, and society loses the most valuable members of each class to less productive means. Any of the supposed fixes to this require even more interventions. Given that government interference got us into this situation, I can hardly see how it would get us out. The most common accompanying policy is some form of relief or job seekers allowance. Economically, this does not improve the issue but only makes it worse. Imagine if we set the minimum wage to £14 an hour, netting a man £112 for a full day of work. We've forbidden anyone from making less than that amount, for example £100 a day. In compensation for this lost £100, we will return them £50 a day. Not only have we deprived society of a valuable service, we have also reduced how much a man can earn for his efforts. The higher the relief amount, the worse the problem gets. If we increased it to £70 a day, then workers are only really earning the difference between their wage and the relief payment. In this sense, the minimum wage worker is only really earning £42 a day. This will make a significant portion of the workforce choose idleness rather than working full-time for a marginally increased income. First, we need to understand what the minimum wage actually represents. A wage is a voluntary trade between employer and employee. An employee decides that an hour of their time is less valuable than £12, and the employer decides that their £12 is less valuable than the employee's hour of work. Voluntary trade will always lead to mutual profit. At the time, both parties believe they are getting the better deal, that the other side has something they want from the trade. Human life itself is fundamentally conditional. Unlike inanimate objects, man must do certain things in order to exist. These life-sustaining actions are fundamental to man. Man is a volitional being that makes decisions in order to stay alive. As such, the primary right is the right an individual has to themselves, the right to pursue what is necessary to keep them alive. If we imagine a situation where I want to donate a man £10, the man is happy to accept my generous donation. We are both engaging in a voluntary trade. Now suppose a third man comes along and holds us both at gunpoint. He forces me instead to give the man £12. Whilst this may be no more than a brute robbery, he has violated both of our rights. From me, he has forced out an additional £2 that I was not willing to give, and he has also violated the rights of the other consenting party by restricting what he can decide to do. He has taken away the individual choice from both parties, essentially posing himself as omniscient. He knows better than either of us what we want, to such a degree that he can actually banish us from the right to our own decisions. On this stance, it is completely unclear why the man could not sentence us both to a life of slavery. Given that he knows better than we do, how can we ever question it? In this case, the government is evidently the thief. And so, on both accounts, ethical and economic, this policy is completely disastrous. It specifically undermines the very people supporters of it wish to protect. There is no clear end to government intervention and the government's insistence on having a dependent population.